This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and this is the MSI GS40 Phantom. You remember how much I liked the Ghost Pro, the GS60 that we reviewed a couple of years back, and we've even seen it come back under other brand names too, the chassis at least, not the entire laptop. Anyway, this time MSI has decided to do what seems like something almost impossible. Pretty much everything that the Ghost Pro was, we have in a 14-inch size, this time around. Quad-core CPU, NVIDIA GTX 970M graphics, 16 gigs of RAM, fast storage, and a full HD display. That is pretty impressive for something this small, 3.5 pounds, slim. You know, the Dell XPS 15 Infinity squeezes a lot into a still bigger 15-inch chassis. This one is even lighter, even smaller. We're going to look at it now. So inside we have the Intel Core i7-6700HQ quad-core 45-watt CPU. That's a powerful CPU. That's not your standard Ultrabook CPU. 2 RAM slots for 16 gigs of DDR4 RAM, both a 2.5-inch HDD, that's hard drive bay, and an M.2 SSD slot. Killer Wi-Fi, killer Ethernet for great connectivity, a backlit red keyboard, a very good webcam by, well, laptop standards. The machine sells for $15.99. There is only one configuration, though. Our unit came from Exotic PC, and they can customize it for you. So now you know what's inside. It is an extremely powerful machine. There are very few direct competitors among big-name laptop brands. Anyway, finding a quad-core laptop's not that hard. Finding something with the NVIDIA 960M is pretty reasonably easy these days. Finding something with the 970M gets harder, and by the 980 and even the 970, you're often looking at bigger gaming laptops. So you won't find many things comparable. The 14-inch Razer Blade would have been a competitor, but you know, it's considerably more expensive than this, and also they still haven't updated it from 4th generation Intel inside. So we're looking at something a lot more cutting edge here. Now, build quality on this is pretty good. It's typical of MSI. This is brushed metal, and the lid is brushed aluminum also. Now, we have the Exotic PC version here. Exotic PC is a reseller of gaming laptops primarily, and they will do customizations for you, including putting on skins like their skin or the skin of your choice, and also upgrading the drives and stuff like that inside. So what they've done is put the Samsung 950 Pro M.2 PCIe NVMe SSD. Is that enough letters for you there? So they'll do those sorts of upgrades for you, and you know, they're not charging an arm and a leg for it. So they're a good place if you want to get upgrades done and you're not up to doing the job yourself. That said, this is a work of art inside. Now, the Ghost GS60 was not an easy laptop to service. It wasn't impossible, but the problem was that you could get to the hard drive bay, the 2.5-inch drive bay, but if you wanted to get to things like the RAM slot, that was on the flip side of the motherboard, so you actually had to take the motherboard out to get to the components. This one we'll switch to a slide that shows you the internals in a moment, but you'd still have, despite the small size, a 2.5-inch drive bay, an M.2 SSD slot, supports NVMe. Again, 2 RAM slots readily accessible up top, and of course the battery. The only thing that's not readily accessible is actually the wireless card, which is unusual. Usually they are. Happily, we have killer networking inside, both for the Ethernet and for the Wi-Fi. It's 1525 802.11 AC dual band. That is awesome wireless. It really has very good throughput and good range, so you're doing well there. 2 fans inside, also one for the CPU and one for the graphics card, and you'll see a whole lot of heat pipes in there too. That really has been effective in reducing the heat on this. This is not as hot as the Ghost Pro, despite the fact the Ghost Pro is a 15.6-inch, so it has more room for thermals and cooling. Now, unlike the brushed black aluminum lid, which you would be able to see if we didn't have the Exotic PC customization on the lid, and the brushed black aluminum keyboard deck, this panel here is plastic. As ever with MSI's thin gaming laptops, I'm not going to complain because plastic doesn't get as darn hot as metal, and this would be more painful to the touch. So let's talk about the gorilla in the room, heat and noise. This is a noisy little bugger. There's no way around it. It has to run the fans constantly to keep the machine cool. Now, CPU and GPU temperatures are quite acceptable. In the 50s for the CPU under normal load, 70s to 80s when gaming, and that's well below the 100-degree centigrade thermal sealing there, and the GPU stays cool too. We didn't see any thermal throttling whatsoever when playing games, when driving it hard, when benchmarking. That's all good. It does get hot. It gets hot, particularly right where you saw the two fans were located. That's where most of the heat's going to be. Now, the heat gun said 115 degrees Fahrenheit at the two hottest spots. So anything above human body temperature, 98.6 nominally, is going to feel warm and then getting progressively hotter. That's still not as bad as the Ghost Pro, which managed to get up to like 128 for surface temperatures. And in fact, they had that felty, suede kind of pad here. So the surface, you wouldn't touch the surface directly, it wouldn't burn. Somehow with this one, there may be hot air coming out, but this does not, the surface itself, get all that burning hot. It'll make your legs sweat, you'll feel it, but it's not like, oh my God, I'm going to hurt myself. But still, it's pretty toasty. The fans will always be running. They cycle on and off when just doing productivity work, when being idle. If you're playing a game, you'll hear it. We'll have some game time on this, and it is plenty loud. Yeah. So that's the price you pay still for squeezing these kind of internals in something this super thin and light. Again, 3.5 pounds. Crazy. Now, just to underscore how impressive the size is here, this is the MSI Dominator Pro, the GT72. This is a 17.3-inch laptop. It's always cool, it's always quiet, but look at the size of the chassis. I mean, this thing is a monster. This is a moose. It dwarfs this little 14-inch guy. Now, this guy's available with the 970M, the big one, and the 980M, which this particular unit has. So you're looking at somewhere roughly the same internals at, right? You see what I'm saying? It's pretty good. Now, typically in the thin and light but super duper performance, that means a good dedicated graphics chip inside and a quad-core CPU, you're looking often at things that cross over into the consumer/business kind of thin and light. This is the Dell XPS 15 Infinity. This is a 15.6-inch machine, so it still has a bigger chassis on it. It is very thin and light. 960M, not 970M. There is a significant difference if you're a gamer. If you're just buying this to do video editing and stuff like that, you'll be fine with the 960. But if you're really into gaming, you want the 970 if you can, because it gives you a lot of future-proofing with games, and it lets you play games that are AAA titles today on high to ultra settings, which is pretty cool, versus medium to high settings on the 960. So the Dell is very light, but it's still heavier, around 4 pounds or so. It's pretty much an engineering marvel in itself, but the MSI achieves a bit more. This is the ASUS ZenBook Pro UX 501, another 15.6-inch with obviously a bigger footprint, but also thin and light. Same quad-core CPU inside and 960M graphics, again, not 970. And the Razer Blade, like I said, would be the other 14-inch competitor. Hasn't been refreshed. We expect that's going to happen sometime soon because it's pretty overdue. That one's going to cost you more money than the MSI will. And it'll be most likely just like the last, the outgoing Blade, pretty noisy and pretty toasty too. So how does that performance translate in terms of benchmarks? Well, here's our PC Mark 8 score, 3859 for the home accelerated test. Very respectable, and pretty much also what you would expect from a machine with this kind of power. Geekbench 3, our single core, 3760, our multi-core, 13,525, again, 2.6 gigahertz. Intel Core i7-67HQ, that's a 45-watt CPU inside. For a 3D Mark Extreme, this is 3D Mark 11, 3382. Again, very good. And for the 3D Mark Firestrike test, 6775. Again, right where we would expect this to be, 21,664 for the CloudGate test. So, yep, this is a fast machine. And again, I didn't see any thermal throttling, and the graphs tell you about that right over here as well. If you run this on battery power, there is some throttling to conserve power, however, which is not unusual. This has NVIDIA Optimus, which means you can switch to HD 530 integrated graphics if you're not doing anything that requires dedicated graphics. Optimus is pretty good about picking whether or not you need the dedicated GPU. So if you're doing Photoshop or you're doing gaming, it's going to turn it on. That doesn't mean that when you're unplugged, it'll never use the dedicated graphics. It will. Now, there is pretty much only one model of the GS40 that is shipping, and that has 128 gig SSD and that 1 terabyte 7200 RPM hard drive. But Exotic PC upgraded this one with the Samsung 950 Pro. That's the best NVMe SSD you can get right now, 512 gig in the case of this particular unit. And you can see the scores here are excellent, and they are a lot better than the lower level NVMe drives that you can get. Ports are certainly plentiful for a machine this size, and that's something we've come to expect from MSI, but to be fair, as it gets smaller, it does get to be more difficult to have so many ports, including right here, we have Ethernet, gigabit Ethernet, killer E2400. That's where the power plugs in. USB 3.0 port, we have a SD card slot, separate headphone and mic jacks. This has ESS Sabre audio DAC for good sounding audio through headphones, which is good because the speakers on this are not up to MSI's usually loud and full standards. I guess the chassis getting this small, they just ran out of room, and there is no subwoofer on this one. Here's something special for you USB-C fans. USB-C port, it's not just USB 3.1, it's also Thunderbolt 3. So, not that this machine needs much graphics help, but in theory, external graphics amplifiers that use Thunderbolt 3 should work with this when they're available. They're not available yet, and besides, the 970M kind of kicks butt already. Another USB 3.0 port here, full-size HDMI, and where's that display port? Wait. It's on the back. There it is. So you get DisplayPort as well. This can drive 4K monitors at 60 Hertz. I like MSI keyboards, particularly on the smaller machines better. They just tend to feel a bit more crisp and have nicer damping. This is very pleasant to type with. Unlike the Ghost Pro, there's no room for a numeric keypad here, which is okay. Honestly, if you're a hardcore gamer, you're probably going to plug in an external, even mechanical keyboard. Anyway, red backlighting. This doesn't have RGB multicolor backlighting, just red all around. Nice feel to it, good key travel despite the fact this is a thin machine. Very nice damping. Not noisy at all. It's quite silent when you type on it or bang on it. The deck is pretty firm. If you press on it, you can get a little bit of movement. I mean, you have to type like a gorilla, in my opinion, to really complain much about trampolining here, though. It's pretty good. The Elan trackpad, on the other hand, here's a funny thing. The first 3 minutes that I used this, I thought, wow, is this an MSI? This trackpad's not too bad. Well, the more I used it, the less pleasing it became. Typical of MSI, two-finger gesture is just a real challenge, but it is actually better than the Dominator GT72 that we reviewed in terms of the fact that I could click and drag things around without having accidents happen and accidentally dropping files where I didn't mean to and things like that, but not a real great trackpad. Again, for gamers, you're going to be using either a controller or a mouse. You're probably not ever going to use a trackpad for that, but if you're interested in something that's thin and light, you're also interested in productivity, it's passable. It is not up to snuff compared to Microsoft Surface Book or the Dell XPS 15 Infinity. But the Asus ZenBook 501 Pro, that one doesn't have a great trackpad either, so it's not any worse than that one. Now, typical of Asus, especially so the price point doesn't get too astronomical, but because they still have gamers in mind, this is not a touchscreen and it is not glossy. It is a matte, non-touch display, and it is a very pleasing display at that. 301 nits of brightness, so it's plenty bright. Color gamut's pretty good on it. It's 92% of sRGB, 71% of Adobe RGB. Now, MSI offers a bunch of out-of-the-box color calibrations you can choose from, and I always like to calibrate it myself, and that brings it perfectly in line, though their sRGB calibration option is actually pretty pleasing and pretty close to correct. It's a good display. It calibrates up easily enough to be pretty color accurate, so it certainly is suitable for photo and video work, and the fact that it is anti-glare really helps. I mean, it's still a piece of glass. You'll catch reflections as you move it a bit, but this is nothing like a glossy display. Of course, for those of you who can't live without touch, this won't be the display for you. The webcam above the display is a 1920 by 1080 webcam, a little bit better than your average 720p. That's because I figure you might be using Twitch to record yourself when you're gaming, you and your beautiful face. You can capture them with this, and it does look a bit better than your average laptop webcam. But still, you'll probably want a dedicated external module if you really want to catch your mug in all its perfect glory. So let's talk about the other gorilla in the room, battery life. That's usually not very good with gaming laptops. When you got something this thin and light with not an absolutely huge battery inside, it can't be a good story, can it? Well, it's an okay story. It's It's about 4 to 5 hours, and that's doing productivity and streaming video kinds of things, not gaming. That will be a lot shorter if you actually try to game with this. So it's not super fantastic. It's not hideous either. I would say, given that the display is quite bright, you can run this at about 33% brightness or so, and you could squeeze up to 5 hours on, depending on what you're doing. If you're spending your time editing video in Premiere, not so much. If you're doing MS Office, then yes, so much. The power brick is pretty light, actually, given the size of it. This is not going to be an Ultrabook sort of power supply because it has to power the quad-core CPU and that graphics card. And in fact, this is a 150-watt power supply. Really, it should be 160 watts to make sure that the battery doesn't drain a little bit while plugged in when you're absolutely taxing the CPU to max. And in fact, it is possible to drain the battery while taxing the CPU and GPU to max. So even when playing a variety of games with this, we didn't have that happen. Sometimes when doing some heavy-duty benchmarks, we saw it actually not manage to actually increase charging at that point, increase the battery charge, that is. That is what it is. I don't know why, unless they're just trying to keep this just a little bit smaller and lighter, why they didn't go with the 160-watt power supply there. So how about actual gaming? Well, this can tackle any of today's top, the most demanding games, generally speaking on high, if not ultra settings. And here you can see we use GeForce Experience to optimize for Fallout 4. And we've got a mostly high and ultra settings running here. We're going to see how it plays right now. All right, so here we are in beautiful South Boston in Fallout 4. And there's some super mutants. And I love the way you really can't aim much in this game. Die! Die, die. So we have some action, we have some blood and gore here, we have some nice dramatic lighting, we have very high settings, and he's just not going to die, is he? Can I run up and just kick him? There we go, that was disgusting. Oh. Head of mutant, no, no. So there we are, upper 50s to 60 frames per second. Nobody could ask for more. That is pretty darn sweet. Looking beautiful, looking sharp here, no problem, running around. It all looks good in Fallout 4. Like you would see in a 17-inch gaming laptop. But aha, this one is 14 inches. Cool. So here we are in Battlefield 4 now, mostly on ultra settings, 1920 by 1080, which is native resolution, so you don't have to worry about scaling or anything like that here. And I'm playing with a controller, which I don't usually do. And look at those frame rates, right? They started out insanely high, and they're still very good. And this is a crazy bad firefight. So this machine can handle anything that you throw at it. So that's the MSI GS40 Phantom. It's available now. Intel Skylake 6th generation inside, quad-core powerhouse. An amazing amount of performance in a really slim, light, small package. It's just MSI really showing their engineering prowess here with what they've done with this machine. Of course, it's not perfect. Like I said, you will hear the fans. You will pretty much always hear the fans. They may cycle on and off and on and off, but you're going to hear them. And if you're gaming, you might want to wear headphones to try to overcome the loudness of the fans. So it's not all perfect. But still, given where we are at this point in technology right now, that's still a pretty impressive thing. And the fact that they've managed to reduce the heat enough that they don't have to put that kind of felty, suety stuff they used to on the bottom so you don't literally burn yourself when you touch it. Still gets toasty here, but it is not as screaming hot. And you get full bore performance. It doesn't thermal throttle. It's a pretty amazing machine. If you need a lot of power on the go, if you want to game on the road, it's going to be hard to beat this one. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to visit our website for the full written review and subscribe to our YouTube channel.